Okay, so we're going to be learning a kind of a short Maamar, very powerful Maamar from the Rebbe on this week's Parsha. And we'll bring up the text. Most likely we'll be able to finish it all today. And maybe we'll learn a second Maamar, or we'll just have one class this week. Okay, so this is a Maamar on the pasuk at the end of Parshas Yisrael. After the Aseret Adibros, the Ten Commandments, we have the laws of building a altar, a Mizbaiach. So the Torah says, Mizbaiach Adama Tash, the Mizbaiach should be made of earth, and then you sacrifice upon it the sacrifices. Then the next verse continues, however, V'im Mizbaiach Abonim Tasli, if you were to make an altar out of stone, i.e., you can make out of both. You make out of earth. So here the pasuk says the word v'im, if. In the English translation of Chabad.org, it has v'im mizbeach abonim tasli, when you make a mizbeach out of stone, because the base of Mikdash and the base of Mikdash was out of stone. Is loy sivne es and gazis, you can't use a gazis stone, meaning a stone that's cut. Because if you're going to put the sword on the stone, it's going to be it's going to make chalul, it's going to damage, it's going to spiritually unqualify the stones to be used as a altar. So we have two verses, one after the next. One is that if you make that when you make a mizbeach, you should make a mizbeach, an altar out of earth. If or when you make a mizbeach out of stones, so you can't use them. You can't cut the stones, and because it's going to disqualify the stones to be used as an altar. Why? Because then the idea is given because metal, which is the mizbeach, is built for fixing, so to say, the sins that are done by people, and sword causes sin. The sword kills. The mizbeach is a kapara, is an atonement for sin. So you can't have the thing that the altar that is an atonement for sin to be used to be created with tools that cause sin, like death, which is a sword. Although it means it's not just sin, because the sword could be used for positive things. Also, if you go out to war, it's not a sin. Or if you use a sword for something that you're supposed to be using it for, but the sword is made for destruction, and the mizbeach is made for shalom, for peace. The mizbeach is made for atonement and peace, and the stone and the swords are made for destruction. So you can't have something that's made for destructions used to build something that's made for peace. All right. So the Rebbe asks, one has to ask, Mizbaiach Adama, why, when we talk about the altar made out of earth, there's no conditions. It just says, if you are to make, or you should make a altar out of earth, and you sacrifice your sacrifices. It's simple. When it comes to the Mizbaiach of the stones, the altar of the stones, it says, Mizbaiach Avanim, Lashon tonight. It uses a terminology of condition. That if you want to make an altar out of stone, the condition is you can't use a sword to cut the stones. So what's the difference between the stones and the earth? Okay, although we've given a reason, like Rashi says, because the sword is something, and sword is not required for the earth, where it's required. One would think that possibly it's required for the stones, but they're asking a deeper idea. The idea is like this. There's a Maamar from the Rebbe Marash in the Shabbos of Yisrael in the year Tov Reish Mem, which would be 1880, if I'm right. It's different than what's brought down from his father, the Tzemach Tzedek, on this idea. That the Rebbe Marash says as follows. Reb Shmuel Shner says, fourth Rebbe Chabad. The Beis Hanyanim, the Adam Vavonim, what are the two ideas of the altars that are made out of earth, or the altar made out of stone? They represent, because we know the Mizbeach is not just an altar that was in the tabernacle in the Mishkan, or Mizbeach, or an altar that was in the temple, but there's also the Mikdash v'Shechanti b'Socham. There's within each and every one of us an altar. There's in each and every one of us a tabernacle, a Beis Hamikdash. So they represents two types of avodas, two types of service. A person has to have within their service of Hashem the concept of an altar, something that you sacrifice. And what does that represent? Ha'alah, to elevate, Nilamata, to take the mundane and elevate it Lamaila above, like this, like the altar they put on it the animal, and it was a sacrifice to Hashem above. There's two types of ways of this avodah of elevation, mean mata Lamaila, from below above. There's the method that's represented by the Mizbaiach, the altar that's out of earth. And there's the method that's represented by the Mizbaiach out of stone. Mizbaiach Adama, when we talk about the Mizbaiach, the altar that's out of stone, Kaya al Adam Shnikra Adam Hashem Shinivra Min Hadama. What's the idea of Adama? What do we have in Adama? In the Adama, we have the root of the world, Adam, right? Adama, Aleph Dal Mem is Adam. And Ha-Adam is Adama. Why is it called Ha-Adam? Because man is made from the earth, that's why we're called Adam. And also, Hashem Adam al-Elyon, we're made in the image of God, which is also representing the idea of, like we learned in many times, there's difference between the Chayes HaKodesh, there's the holy animals in the Merkava, and there's the Dmus of Ha-Adam, of man on top of the chariot. And the man of in this world is Adam al-Elyon, is like Hashem, meaning we're made in the form of man, and the idea of iskalalus coexistence. Animals are very exact. The animals have very exact emotions. An animal of a lion represents chesed, shar is gvura, nesher is rachmanis, right? Those are exact emotions, whereas the Adam is iskalalus, is coexistence. So the reason why a person is called Adam is because we come from earth and we're like Hashem. We're in the God's image. So that's represented in the Mizbaiach Adama, of the altar of earth. Mizbaiach Adama, what's the idea of the altar of stones? We'll understand what this means in the separate avodah. First, we want to show what they represent. We're not talking about the image of man with the Mizbaiach that represents man, but deeper issues, so to say, the sparks that they've fallen so low, the sparks that have fallen so low, the avodim that are like stones that are lifeless. Earth is, things grow from there. The idea of the avodim is, in this case, we're talking about the sparks that are like something that would fall into a stone that's lifeless. So we have the Mizbaiach Adama, which represents the norm of the person, where the Mizbaiach of the avodim of the stones represents when there's something that's broken or something that's lost that needs to be redeemed and fixed. The Rebbe explains, the Bir Indian idea is like this. This is a very beautiful, short Maamar, very much in the style of old Chassidic ideas that were said in short pen. So the Rebbe says like this, the Bir Indian idea is like this. Where does Moshe talk? When is he talking this week's parsha about the two types of altars? He's talking to the generation that left Egypt. You do, and it's known. The Rebbe quotes from the Pri Eitz Chaim, from the Kabbalistic writings of the Ariyah HaKadosh, that the generation of the Jews who left Egypt, known as the Dor HaMidbar, is the generation that left Egypt are the Gilgal, are the reincarnation of the generation of the Dor HaFlaga. Dor HaFlaga is the generation of the generation of those who built the Tower of Bavel after the flood. Before we learn about Avram, this is in the end of Parshas Noach, right? The generation that built in Bavel, the Tower of Babylon. One could ask, how could you say that the generation that left Egypt are the generation of the Dor HaFlaga, of those who built the Tower of Babylon? We have a Mishnah in Talmud Sanhedrin that we learned in our Sanhedrin classes that says about the different various peoples or generations that do or do not have a portion in the world to come. The Gemara teaches us in the Mishnah that Dor HaFlaga, the generation of the Tower of Babylon, they do not have a portion in the world to come, and there's no resurrection for them to be judged in the day of judgment. They are They war and it's over, seemingly. So how could you say that the generation of Mitzrayim is a reincarnation? Those who left Egypt are a reincarnation of Dor HaFlag. It seems like that whole generation that we closed the book on them. They don't have a portion of world to come. There's no resurrection where they're going to be judged. It's over. It happened. It is what it is. Achinin, the idea is, like this. When we say that they don't have a portion of the world to come, that in the time of when Mashiach comes in Olam Haba, and there's going to be a resurrection of the dead, he's evidently referring to. So their group, their bodies will never be fixed, and they'll never have a resurrection in Olam Haba that is going to have a fixing of their bodies. But they had souls. Everybody has a soul. Their souls went into new bodies, the bodies of those who were in the generation of Egypt, and their souls went through a cleansing process. Mizdacheches means to be shined and cleansed through the fact that they had to build with bricks and mortar. Why? Because the Tower of Babylon was made out of bricks and mortar. And that's why Pari is talking to Bnei Yisrael. So we see over here it says in see if we could bring this up. Pasuk says that it says in verse 18 in chapter 5 of Shemais, it says, this is when the Jewish people were told that they're going to have to no longer going to get the raw materials. They're still going to have to build the bricks. It says that now go to work, but you will not be given the stubble that's used for the bricks. Nevertheless, the same number of bricks you must give. What are we talking about over here? Because this is a reference, the Rebbe says. This is Pari says that you still have to give the bricks. You still have to account for the bricks that you built in the Tower of Babylon. What was the sin of the generation of the Tower of Babylon? As it says, so we have the pasuk that says in Nayach. So when they build the Tower of Babylon, it says, it says, come let us build ourselves a city and a tower. The tower will reach to heaven. And we'll give ourselves a name, so that we will not be scattered, so we all stay together. And it says afterwards, Hashem to see what the people have built. So here he says, what was Paro saying? Paro is saying, you have to give an accountability for the stones that you built in the Der HaFlaga, like it says, that they used they made from the bricks, from the straw, they made bricks, and they made the mortar. And we want to build a tower and a city. We'll give ourselves a name, Vitanya, and we learned. The Brisa tells us in Sanhedrin over there, the whole idea of building the Tower of Babylon was in a form of idol worship. It says, what does it mean to make ourselves a name? Like it says in the verse, to use your name for idols, you shouldn't mention. Don't mention the names of other idols. They made out of the bricks that they used to build a tower. And you have to remember, according to most of the bricks were invented at that time, because until then they had stones. But because Bavel has no stones, they figured out how to make bricks from using the teven. So they worshipped those bricks. Many Chassidic discourses explain the difference between bricks and stones, created stones, man-made stones, God made stones, etc. But generally, they used it as an avodah zarah because they were able to build with it. They felt they made it. What's avodah zarah? Avodah zarah is separating something from Hashem. The idea of bricks is a man-made stone, so they worshipped it as a form of idol worship. There's many different forms of idol worship, but this is the idea. The idea is when you separate something from Hashem, it's a form of idol worship, fundamentally. And Shem also halavoina by the zara. So they made out the bricks in avodah zara. Adirach Maamar Zak says zakif levana v'shtachvela. They put up a brick and bowed to it. So how would the Jews who were reincarnation of the souls of the people from the Dora Haflaga, from the generation of the Tower of Bavel, their bodies will never be resurrected, and they won't be even standing up for the day of judgment, but their souls go through a cleansing because they were the same souls of the Jewish people who were in Egypt, and through toiling in bricks and mortar and stones, they were able to fix what their souls did in the building of the Avodah Zarah in the Tower of Babylon. And this happens many times this is the idea of reincarnation, which is a very complicated concept, where reincarnation kind of deals with issues, and a person sometimes doesn't identify why are they dealing with certain issues in their life. And the idea is really, it's possible that they're rectifying or fixing or dealing with an issue that they did in a previous life. And therefore they have to engage in certain things in order to rectify what they've once done. And therefore the Jewish people although this has nothing to do with the fact that Avram Avinu's descendants had to go to Galus and had to get to sparks, but there's also the concept that they specifically were able to, while they were doing what they have to do in Galus, to rectify what they've done in building the Tower of Babylon and the reincarnation of their origin of their souls. That's why the idea of reincarnation is a very complicated topic, because it's dealing with past and present simultaneously. The Mizbaiach Adama So when we talk about the tabernacle, the altar that's made out of stone, which is Adam Elyon, which we said before, that's similar to that idea of Or Yosher, the normal path a person's made from the earth, things of the regular. So that's the avodah of Torah mitzvahs, which we take the permissible. Rishus, binyan rishus means we take the permissible. You don't take things that are separate from God, things that are egotistic, things that are sources to avodah zarah. The Tanya says, you can only use the permissible for the performance of Torah mitzvahs. For instance, we go in Esrog what Tanya describes as the klipas noga, the permissible. If you take an esrog from a forbidden fruit, meaning from orla, which hasn't sat 3 years on the tree, right? We have the first 3 years of the fruit. That's one of the greatest levels of tumah. The sign is how much bittul it needs. Usually things could be nullified in 100, 60, 100. Orla is only nullified in 200. So it's a real deep tumah. And like the Tanya says, you can't take an esrog from orla and say, what do you mean? The Torah says I have to take an esrog. I'll take an esrog from orla. What's the difference to God if the fruit already been through a process, if the tree has given fruit for 3 years or not? No, if you take an esrog from orla, you can't do that. Torah has to be formed with what's permuter, what's permissible. That's why when we're talking about how we deal with avoda, which is represented by the Mizbaiach Adama, which is the norm, there's no conditions. That's the norm. That is the reason why the norm was created. That a person goes down to the world, takes the divrei rishos, the permissible, although they're not yet godly and they're the klipas noga, they could use for something wrong. But right now, there's something that if you take the esrog and use it for something shebekdusha, comes as a davar shebekdusha. It may be not that the actual esrog comes holy, but the esrog becomes an article or something, a fruit that's used to do the mitzvah of arba minim. Therefore, there's no condition. We don't have to condition that you use a kosher esrog, meaning a non-orla. You can't use an esrog that's not permissible. That's why we say Mizbaiach Adama Tash. Yes, if you go through the normal path, if you're normal avodah, which is Mizbaiach of Adama, so then you put on your sacrifices, your oilais, your shlamim, your sheep, your bakar, your cattle. The kal kol pratei avodah Torah mitzvahs. This represents Mizbaiach, the spiritual Mizbaiach of elevation of the permissible, which is the idea of Torah mitzvahs. The Torah says, Mashenkim Mizbaiach avonim, but if you're a person you're not just dealing with the permissible, you're struggling with the levels of the sparks that are lost. Mizbaiach avonim. Like we said before, what's the idea of the spark of the Mizbaiach of the stone? Represents the sparks that are lost like stones, they're lifeless like stones, representing the sparks that fall into the 3 levels of Tumah. And therefore, it's not enough to just have the permissible. You need to exercise a skafia, restraint of the sitra achra of the other side, which represents the side of tumah of impurity, until you have to reach the level of ishapcha, transformation of the sitra achra of the side of impurity. And you get the benefit of when you exercise restraining yourself and you exercise transformation. Then now you have the light that comes from darkness, but you engaged in darkness. And you have chachma, wisdom that comes from foolishness. You're engaged in foolishness. You have to find. It means there's the struggle. That's the avodah of birurim. That's in a deeper level of birurim, not just the birur that's through the permissible. We're not talking about nisyonis necessarily, which is a third level, but we're talking about birurim of things that are lost, sparks that are lost. Therefore, when it comes to building Mizbaiach out of stone, the conditions are not the same. The Torah says there's time. Oh, 1 second, hold on. You want to be able to engage. If you're a voda or you're a person that's dealing with the sparks that are lost, or you're dealing with yourself, that you're lost in the 3 levels of tumah. Obviously, not your neshama, but the struggle is lost. So there's conditions. Because you're dealing with sparks that are in the tumah, you can't just use any kind of knife, any kind of utensils. You have to make sure, be careful not to use a knife, which is something that represents negative, although it represents destruction. To use that as a method of dealing with the stones, with the sparks that are lost, because it can make it unusable. The flip side, because these are great sparks that are lost. Usually, the higher the thing is, the lower it falls. So, therefore, the person who's struggling with the sparks that are lost like stones, respect the moment. The Rebbe says, don't look at it as gewaldige word. You have to have respect for that. This is your avodah. That means a person may look at it as, I wish my avodah was in the simplicity, the simple, just doing Torah mitzvahs. Why am I struggling with things that are on the 3 levels of the sparks that are lost in tumah? The Rebbe says, no, don't take a knife out to that. Why? Because a knife would be disrespectful for what you're engaging in it with delicacy. It's an honor, so to say, to be the person that's doing, although it's maybe not the first choice that you would go initially into. But if that's your situation, understand that you have great koiches to be able to take out those sparks from places of lost, of stone. The Rebbe continues, the Zohar teaches us. It's so short, but it's like mamish, an old style Maamar that has an akudah. The Zohar teaches that our generation, meaning the generation before Mashiach comes, the footsteps of Mashiach, is a Gilgul. We are reincarnations of the generation of Rashbi. That's what the Zohar says, the generation of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. And the Zohar teaches that the Dor of Rashbi is the Gigul of Dor Midbar, is the generation of those who left the desert, those who were in the desert, the Dor Midbar, and Dor that left Egypt. I'm not going to get into the Gemara that talks about also if Dor HaMidbar have a portion in the world to come. And is the Dor HaMidbar the same as Dor Shiatzim and Mitzrayim? This means this generation that left Egypt and this generation that was in the Midbar. It's not necessarily, we're talking about the exact same generation, although most people overlapped. It could be those are themselves 2 different generations, but let's just leave it in general. The Rashbi, that the generation of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai is the generation of Dor HaMidbar and Dor Shiatzim and Mitzrayim. Possibly that's why that was close and right around the Dor HaShmad, the generation that dealt with the severe decrees from the Romans, which is known as Dor HaShmad after the fall of Bar Kochba. That's why Moshe, who is the one who took the Jews out of Egypt, is the same Moshe who takes the Jewish people out of where Mashiach comes, because it's all the same generation. So we basically, if you put it all together, we have the generation of the Tower of Bavel. That's a reincarnation. That when it has a reincarnation, it's the generation of Mitzrayim, generation of the desert. That's a reincarnation into the generation of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, and that's our generation, the Dor of Mashiach. It's all the same set of souls, and therefore Moshe Rabbeinu was there is also with us here. We're Moshe's people, Anshe Moshe. Therefore, just like in Moshe's times, there's the 2 level of avodah, the level that represented by the Mizbaiach, the altar of earth, which is the regular path, the Or Yosher, and the Or Choizer, which is I'm giving it the title of Or Choizer, which is the Mizbaiach of Avonim, which is dealing with the sparks that are lost in Tumah, in impurity. So that's also avodah. That's things sometimes, and we're not just talking about 2 types of people. Some people may be having to deal with the altar of earth, and some people have to do with the altar of stones. It could be within ourselves. We have parts of ourselves that is the yasher that deals with the altar of. We have like two kind of altars going on in our heart, right? The heart, we know that the heart represents the altars. Then there's the Mizbaiach Achitza, Mizbaiach Apnimi, but even the Mizbaiach Achitza, that's for the oiles and the shlamim, that is for the animals, not for the spices, for the ketoras. But sometimes our Mizbeach is made out of earth, which represents when we do our Torah in the normal way, taking the permissible. Sometimes we're struggling with the sparks. And then our Mizbeach, that means that moment that has to be elevated is dealing with stones, the sparks that are lost like stones, and we have to have respect for that moment. Don't put swords on that moment. The Rebbe finishes off this beautiful Maamar, may it be God's will. That we should have the redemption speedily from this horrible galus, exile. Like it says, like the days of Egypt, because sometimes we're dealing with the earth and sometimes we're dealing with the stones. And we should elevate all the sparks of holiness. Like it says, and the Jewish people left Egypt, they cleansed Egypt out of any sparks. Not just the permissible, even the sparks lost like stones. Like it says, Mashiach comes. The hearts that are made out of stone will be taken out of us. What a word. I don't know if the Rebbe means what I'm thinking now, but the idea of this pasuk, Basiraisi Slave Evan, that we're going to take out the heart of stone, means that you'll start feeling something. But it could be, it also means the Rebbe is alluding to the idea that I'm going to take out your heart of stone. We know the heart is the Mizbaiach. That the Mizbaiach that you had to deal with, that you had to struggle with the sparks that were lost because they were in. You were struggling with the escapiness, with the transformation and the restraining yourself from pashat falling for averos. I'm going to take that mizbeach away from you because when Mashiach comes, we're not going to have that struggle anymore. Yikun mashakasav, when we should have the fulfilled what the verse says. In arena with our elders and our younger, with our sons and our daughters. Loitishar parsa, we should not going to leave anything behind. Not one spark, one speck of the sparks, kasvam, zahavim, itam, their gold, their silver, yachad immamoinim shal Yisrael, with the gold and silver of the Jewish people. Shem she'azlai ikvan hamakam, kerefayim. Now we have to understand this, that just God decides when Mashiach comes, not presidents and not politicians and not the dignitaries. Hashem decides that when the moment comes, He's not going to keep us for kerefayim, not even like a blink longer than we have to stay in Gullus. So too now, we've already passed all the deadlines. Like the Maamar says in Sanhedrin, that what's holding up possibly Mashiach coming is tshuva. The Rebbe even said later that the tshuva we also did. Yisrael leisim tshuva miyad in the Gom. The Jewish people do tshuva will be redeemed immediately. With the true complete redemption, speeding our times. We'll see if I post. We'll do maybe possibly another short Maamar tomorrow, Wednesday, and Thursday. If not, then this will be the Maamar for the week. Have a wonderful day. Take care.